Some of us, no doubt, have seen the popular but controversial new film called Hunger Games. Have you seen it? Yeah. Well, this is not to either extol the merits of or to encourage you not to see the film, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about it. The film is based on the first in a series of post-apocalyptic dystopian novels for young adults. The story goes like this. The government, now this is post-apocalypse, the government takes children, teenagers, and has them fight one another in order, they say, to maintain peace and order in the districts and to prevent uprisings. So each year, they choose 2 young representatives from each of the 12 districts by lottery to participate in these Hunger Games. The 24 participants then are forced, in order to save their own lives, to eliminate their competitors one by one, while the citizens watch. It's brutal and dehumanizing, and it's intentionally so. The games were designed to promote hostility between the districts. But something unexpected happens in this film as 2 of the young people connect with one another. They see each other with kindness, and they begin to realize that survival may actually depend more on care and cooperation than it does on competition and killing. With this connection, we'll see what happens in the next film, but with this connection, they may have alternative means to seek another kind of peace for themselves and for the world. I point this out because the Roman government in Jesus' time maintained what they called peace in a very similar way. They tried to silence and eliminate anything that would threaten their governance, their reign. They defined peace then as the absence of uprising, maintenance of control throughout the empire. But as we know, Jesus defied this definition of peace with his very life. And he offered an alternative peace strategy, one that I believe will serve us today. Let's look at the story. It's still the day of resurrection when the events of today's gospel lesson take place. Jesus has begun appearing to them, risen and alive. First, of course, we know to the women at the tomb, then to Cleopas and another follower on that road to Emmaus. On this day, Jesus came and went dramatically, appearing suddenly in rooms and on roads. Those who encountered this stranger Jesus on the road to Emmaus and then consequently broke bread with him and recognized him have returned to Jerusalem to tell the 11 disciples about these stunning events that they had witnessed. They found them. They found the disciples in the city where they were gathered in fear, locked in a room. After all, with the Roman government strategy, what? They could be next, couldn't they? This is how the government kept peace, and they knew that. As they shared their experiences, their hopes and their fears, it happened again. Peace be with you, Jesus said, as he appeared with them in that closed room. Now, peace be with you was something of a standard way for people to greet one another. Nothing extraordinary about these words, except that they were spoken by one who had just experienced anything but peace, one who had just been betrayed and flogged and killed. What was Jesus saying? Did he announce himself in this way simply to tell his friends, it's okay, calm down? Was this just simply to say, shh, quiet? Or was he reassuring them that he still loved them, that he was coming to them in peace? After all, they had left him, hadn't they? They had left him to endure the brutality of the cross. So, peace be with you could be an assurance, a settling invitation to calmness and remembrance. But our tradition, I believe, the tradition of the prophets, the tradition of the scriptures, tells us that perhaps Jesus could have meant something even more than that when he said, "Peace be with you." After all, the word and notion of peace has a prominent place in the vocabulary of our faith. It appears over 200 times in the scriptures. The prophets speak of things so dramatic as beating swords into plowshares and of a coming time of peace. The church picks up this theme in our worship every single week as we pass the peace of Christ to one another, as we sing the words of the Gloria, glory to God in the highest, and what? Peace on earth to all people. As we conclude our worship each week, we receive the blessing, go in peace. And we speak of those who pass from this life as resting in peace. But this isn't peace as the world knew it then or even now. This isn't the oppressive peace of the Roman Empire. This peace of Jesus is a different deal altogether. It's social, it's political, it's spiritual, and it's relational. The word Jesus used in this greeting is something like the Hebrew word shalom. It's the sort of peace that means more, way more than just the absence of war or the absence of conflict. It means harmony, deep harmony, and prosperity for all. It means security and tranquility, safety in our souls and in the world. It turns the ethic, an eye for an eye, right on its ear. Jesus already, before he was crucified, already had quite a track record on living a peaceful, nonviolent life. Just from the very beginnings of his ministry, when he was in his hometown, was less than peaceful. You may remember the crowd who thought he was nuts. They wanted to push him off a cliff. But Jesus didn't argue with them. He didn't fight back. He didn't, I guess, really stand up for himself. Rather, he passed through the crowd and he left town rather than having a fight. When the Pharisees wanted to destroy him, he did the same. When Herod threatened to kill him, he sent word to Herod that he had every intention of continuing the work that he was doing. He stood his ground without retaliation. Several times, soldiers were sent to arrest him, but he slipped out the back and eluded them. And in the end, he didn't resist. And when he was cursed, he refused to return insult for insult. Rather, he prayed for those who abused him. This, my friends, is the legacy of peace that we receive from Jesus. Peace not as the world gives. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, he says, turn the other also. If anyone wants to take your coat, give them your cloak too. Don't judge or condemn even your enemies, but love them. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus said, for they shall be called children of God. Peace be with you, Jesus said. And then he showed them his scars. I think this is an important message. This reveals, I believe, the character of the peace that Jesus offers. It isn't a peace that denies the realities of violence and betrayal in the world. It tells us that nurturing peace, that living in peace, that insisting on peace is not the same as ignoring these realities of human behavior. Bearing the wounds of violence, bearing the wounds of the worst that human beings can do to one another, Jesus says, peace be with you. He shows them graphically that this peace isn't some pie in the sky, otherworldly, when we all get to heaven sort of peace. Jesus' peace is not about sitting in a circle around the campfire singing Kumbaya. Rather, the peace of God that Jesus breathes on them is a peace that is operative and active, even when, especially when, we experience pain and betrayal disappointment, and yes, even violence. The followers of Jesus faced an unknown, stirred up, their lives were at stake future. And in some ways, so do we. Times are tough in our world. The insanity of war seems a constant reality in many places around the world. And frankly, politics, internationally and domestically, border on frightening. Safety may seem to us, peace may seem to us like something of a childhood pipe dream. And we realize our own relative powerlessness to transform the conflicts that plague our world. And as if that is not sufficient to convince us that peace just isn't possible in this life, we come face to face with disturbances of peace within our own souls. Something seems to always have us stirred up. Our lives either reflect or contribute to the lack of peace around us. Peace clearly is not the way of the world. It's not always the way of the church. We know that, don't we? Peace is clearly not the natural attitude of our own hearts. We're disturbed with anxiety by conflict that arises from differences. We worry. We may feel depressed. We live with fear and need to have things go our way in order to feel content. So peace eludes us. Peace be with you, Jesus said. Peace be with you, I believe Jesus says to us today. And before Jesus departs, before he leaves them just as he came, he declares that they are witnesses. That is, they have a story to tell. And they have the legacy of this peace that Jesus has spoken to them. They may struggle with it. It may continue to pass them by, but it is their inheritance. Peace be with you. Peace be with you then is a treasure. It's a practice, a heritage that Jesus leaves. It's the beginning of new spiritual possibilities among them. But is this peace even possible? Is it possible for us here and now in our world? How do we try it? How do we touch it and handle it and know it and make it real in our lives? How do we apply Jesus' peace to the condition of our world? Or even to the state that we often find ourselves in as we kick and scream against the hurts and disappointments that are part of our lives, as we struggle to turn the other cheek in an often vengeful world. John gives us some clues, I believe, in his gospel account of this same story. He expounds on what this legacy of peace and nonviolence involves. In John's gospel, Jesus said to them, I give you the power to forgive. Whoever sins you forgive will be forgiven. Whoever sins you retain will be retained. In other words, Jesus gives us the capability to hold on or to let go. To hold on or to let go. This is the key to peace. We can strike back, or we can step into the life of nonviolence. We can bless with peace, or we can harbor resentment in our hearts. Now, I don't believe I'm overstepping my bounds in saying that we usually don't need much help to hold on, to retain the sins that others commit. Most of us do that pretty well. But I know that I could, and I assume that we could all use some help in letting go, in forgiving, so that we can find this depth of peace, so that we can live it and pass it on. I recently heard a story about an all too frequent family battle that escalated with the death of an elderly mother. The siblings were, as they do, dividing the possessions of both their deceased parents. One sister was particularly agitated and protested everything that her brother seemed to ask for. You wouldn't take care of it, she finally gasped at him. Remember, you broke Dad's best watch. Her brother was shocked. And he looked at her and he said, yes, but that was 30 years ago. I've been able to forgive myself and move on. Please let it go so that we can have peace between us. Now, this may be an extreme example of harboring accusation and animosity, or maybe not. We hold on and we punish and we fight. And consequently, we who do the holding on, live without peace. Jesus says, "Peace be with you," and offers us the power to retain or to forgive, to bring peace or to hold grudges and harbor animosity. It is possible, my friends. We can bless as Jesus did. We can pronounce peace. We can work towards reconciliation. Oh, the odds are good that none of us here will be in a place to negotiate world peace, to bring reconciliation to warring nations or even tribes or cities, but that doesn't mean we're impotent. In fact, I wonder if we have more power than we're willing to admit. Power to nurture peace, to nurture it in ourselves, and to offer it to others. We can meet insult with grace. We can counter gossip with kindness. I find comfort when I read in this story that Jesus had to break in to pronounce peace on those disciples. He tracked them down and he walked right into their hiding place. Can Jesus still enter the closed doors that we have around us, cut right through our insistence on getting back at or settling the score? The empowering Spirit, I believe, can cut right through our doors of fear and guilt and anger and give us, yet again, that peace. Jesus' blessing of peace is three things, I think. It's a principle, it's a promise, and it's a new perspective. The principle is that peace is the way. It's the way to God. It's a way of life. It's the way to be children, people of God. The promise is that even in the face of violence, peace will bring us life. Resurrection is the evidence of that. And the new perspective is that peace in our time might just be possible if Jesus and his ways, his peace, can guide our lives. Jesus speaks peace to us. Do you hear it for yourself? Do you hear it for your own life? He's shown the way that turns from violence and revenge and helplessness, the way of love and strength and hope. He leads us in this way of peace and makes us children of God, heirs of a life of peace and purpose. And he commissions us to make peace in our world. I was reminded this week of that teaching that I'm sure most of us have heard that's attributed to a Cherokee grandfather. "My child," the grandfather says to his grandson, "two wolves go to battle inside each of us. One of those wolves is anger and jealousy, greed, vengeance, and resentment. The other wolf is joy, peace, kindness, hope, and truth." The boy thought for a minute. He saw the picture of the wolves doing battle, and then he leaned over and said, "Grandfather, who wins?" The old man looked in the boy's eyes and quietly replied, "The one you feed." Our lives and the lives of others, my friends, will be changed if we feed peace, if we nurture it with daily attention and exercise, if we pass it on, if we have faith that it can make a difference. And so this morning I say to you, may the peace of Christ be with you. Really. May the peace of Christ live in you and through you. This is the moment. But as we know, Jesus defied this definition of peace with his very life. And he offered an alternative peace strategy, one that I believe will serve us today. Let's look at the story. It's still the day of resurrection when the events of today's gospel lesson take place. Jesus has begun appearing to them, risen and alive. First, of course, we know to the women at the tomb. then to Cleopas and another follower on that road to Emmaus. On this day, Jesus came dystopian novels for young adults. The story goes like this. The government, now this is post-apocalypse, the government takes children, teenagers, and has them fight one another in order, they say, to maintain peace and order in the districts and to prevent uprisings. So each year, they choose 2 young representatives from each of the 12 districts by lottery to participate in these Hunger Games. The 24 participants then are forced, in order to save their own lives, to eliminate their competitors one by one, while the citizens watch. It's brutal and dehumanizing, and it's intentionally so. The games were designed to promote hostility between the districts. But something unexpected happens in this film as 2 of the young people connect with one another. They see each other with kindness, and they begin to realize that survival may actually depend more on care and cooperation than it does on competition. Some of us, no doubt, have seen the popular but controversial new film called Hunger Games. Have you seen it? Yeah. Well, this is not to either extol the merits of or to encourage you not to see the film, but I just wanted to tell you a little bit about it. The film is based on the first in a series of post-apocalyptic and killing. With this connection, we'll see what happens in the next film. But with this connection, they may have alternative means to seek another kind of peace for themselves and for the world. I point this out because the Roman government in Jesus' time maintained what they called peace in a very similar way. They tried to silence and eliminate anything that would threaten their governance, their reign. They defined peace then as the absence of uprising, maintenance of control throughout the empire.